Good evening. It's my honor and pleasure to welcome you all to the Beloit and Janesville League of Women Voters Earth Week Forum entitled Water Quality in Rock County. You will be muted throughout this program, and please stay muted. If you have any questions or comments during the program, please place them in the chat portion of the Zoom. We are saving the chat, and our public Q&A will start at 7:30. Right now, our introductions will ensue, and then we will start our discussion. Okay. Let's have, if anyone wants to jump in first and give their introduction, that would be great. My name is Susan Johnson, and I'm the Natural Resources Chair for our Janesville League of Women Voters. And we have a very distinguished expert panel of experts on water across Wisconsin and Rock County with us tonight. And it's just such a pleasure. We do want them each to introduce themselves now and give a short 1 to 2 minute biography. Let's start, if no one wants to jump in, let's start with Addie Schleskel.
Yeah, I'm Addie Schleskel. I work for the Rock River Coalition, where I am the Stream Monitoring and Aquatic Invasive Species Program Coordinator. If you're not familiar, the Rock River Coalition is a nonprofit that's focused on improving the environmental, recreational, cultural, economic resources of the Rock River watershed. And I coordinate community science efforts that are focused on monitoring water quality throughout the watershed. And I also do some work on preventing aquatic invasive species and doing outreach around those issues. And yeah, just started working here last year. Have a background studying water quality out on the East Coast, Chesapeake Bay, and also doing some land management out west. And I'm happy to be here with you all tonight to talk about our local water quality.
Thank you very much and welcome. Let's hear from Bill Frisbee.
Hi, everybody. I'm Bill Frisbee. I am the Director of Water Resources for the City of Beloit. In that role, I oversee our 3 utilities related to water, our drinking water utility, wastewater treatment utility, and then our stormwater utility. I've been with the city for a little over 15 years now, 3 years as the director and 12 years as our stormwater engineer. Have a background with a bachelor's degree in civil engineering and a master's in public administration. And I too am happy to be here tonight with you all.
Thank you very much and welcome. Let's hear now from Christina Anderson.
Great, thank you. I'm Christina Anderson. I work for Wisconsin Land and Water Conservation Association. We are a statewide nonprofit organization that represents county conservation folks. So both county conservationist in Rock County, that would be Andrew Baker and his staff at the department, as well as the elected county board supervisors. Like Wes here, though he's retiring on us or leaving us. So you officially retired, but he would be the other side of our membership that we also represent. We do all sorts of work for our counties, training, resources, help them with new emerging issues. And I have been with Wisconsin Land and Water since 2004, doing in a small nonprofit, every little thing from IT to climate change, drinking water, work a lot with our public health partners like Rick Peterson, trying to get counties to work together over these shared goals. Prior to working at Wisconsin Land and Water, I worked at DNR doing their water action volunteers, like the programs that Addie was just discussing. So it's near and dear to my heart as well. And also before that, worked as a field geologist in Ohio for a couple of years. My degrees are in geology from UW-Eau Claire, and I have a master's in water resources management from Madison. So it's great to be here. Thanks.
Thank you. Let's hear from Ken Bradbury.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Ken Bradbury. I'm the director and Wisconsin state geologist at the Wisconsin Geological and Natural History Survey. The survey is a unit of the University of Wisconsin-Madison Division of Extension. So the survey, we do research on water, especially groundwater around the state. We also make maps, geologic maps of bedrock and quaternary materials, and we publish all those things. And so on our website, there's all sorts of information. Personally, I'm a hydrogeologist, so I've worked with groundwater in Wisconsin for over 40 years now. My background, I grew up on a farm in Indiana, on a dairy farm. I did an undergraduate at Ohio Wesleyan University, a master's degree in geology at Indiana University, and a PhD here at University of Wisconsin-Madison. So thank you for having me this evening.
You're welcome. Welcome. Let's hear from Rick Peterson.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me to this forum. I appreciate it. Rick Peterson, I'm the Environmental Health Director for the Rock County Public Health Department. I've been with the Health Department for, I guess it's going on 22 years now. The Rock County Public Health Department Environmental Division does a lot of different things, but the things related to this topic, we do have a drinking water testing lab where we test for nitrates and bacteria. We also do a lot of well sampling for public and private wells, and we do surface water testing of recreational waters. And I am also involved with the State DNR Drinking Water Study Group and the Rock County Nitrate Work Group. I have a master's degree from UW-Madison in soil science, where I focused on leaching to groundwater of pesticides, and also have undergraduate degrees from UW-Stevens Point in water resources in soil science.
Thank you very much and welcome. Okay, Sarah Peterson, it's your time.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Sarah Peterson, and I'm the science director with Wisconsin's Green Fire. If you're unfamiliar with us, we are a statewide nonprofit, a small nonprofit with a very large dedicated group of volunteers, many of which are retired, both from academia and the Wisconsin DNR, that are dedicated to a number of topical areas, everything from water resources to climate change and energy policy, wildlife, and in between. So we cover a lot of different topics, and we're dedicated to really bringing a voice to the decision-making table around, and stewarding our natural resources in the state. So we do have a work group that works heavily on nitrate contamination, as well as emerging contaminants like PFAS here in Wisconsin. And I hold a bachelor's degree in environmental science from the University of Vermont, and my master's is from the Nelson Institute at UW-Madison. I overlapped with Christina a little bit, and my focus there was in conservation biology and development. My background is in coastal ecology and community-based conservation. So before coming to Wisconsin's Green Fire, I worked with the American Geophysical Union out in Washington, D.C. With a program called the Thriving Earth Exchange, which is a program that works heavily with communities all over the country and connects them with scientists working on all manners of topics related to our natural resources and climate change issues. And I worked very heavily with a lot of environmental justice communities. Before that, I worked with Maryland Sea Grant Extension on issues related to sea level rise in Chesapeake Bay, and completed a Knaus Marine Policy Fellowship out there. So I had a policy itch that I wanted to scratch. So a little bit of that came into my career at that point. And I live in Madison with my husband and my son, who's turning 1 year old.
Okay.
Nice to meet everyone.
Nice to meet you too. Thank you so much. And last, but certainly not least, is Rock County's very own Wes Davis.
Hello, everyone. I'm glad to be here. I've enjoyed meeting some of the people who are on this committee, and I've been a Rock County resident all of my life. I've swum in the Rock River many times back years ago when it wasn't safe to swim in there, but I went anyhow. I love to fish and swim. I've also had a lot of experience in terms of finding out about my native environment here. I went to high school in Edgerton. I went to the University of Wisconsin at Whitewater. I have a couple of degrees in English and also earth science and geology. And then I also got a master's degree in teaching with emphasis on urban planning and environmental planning. So I've been active in that area. And I really look forward to representing my county. I just retired from doing that. And now I got more time to go back to my love of fishing and swimming. So I'm very much into protecting our land. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you all very much. Well, I thought we would start our discussion with Ken Bradbury first, because he is a person who has knowledge about the entire state of Wisconsin, and we certainly would like an overview first before we delve deeper into our own county. So Ken Bradbury, please take it away.
Okay, thank you, Susan. I'm going to share my screen. Do you see the slide now?
Not yet.
Yes.
Not yet.
Okay.
No, says I'm sharing.
We see your slide, or we see your screen, but we see your email, Ken.
Oh,
So maybe
okay. Well,
reshare and pick a different
don't
window.
want to start. Yeah, let's obviously. So, way to start, Ken.
Okay.
Let's try this one.
Great.
There you
Oh,
go.
is that working? Okay, sorry, everybody. So thank you, Susan. So as I said, I'm a hydrogeologist, so I'm going to talk about groundwater. And I only have 3 slides, so don't panic.
No.
The point I want to make in this slide is that Wisconsin has fantastic groundwater. And I don't know if people who haven't lived in other places understand that we take groundwater for granted here, but if you go to other parts of the United States or other parts of the world, groundwater is not so easy to get. It's not always easy to get. It's not always of good quality. And we really, it's just such a wonderful resource for us. And its quality is excellent over most of the state. So, you know, the rest of the night, you're going to hear about problems, probably. I'm going to talk about problems too, but I don't want people to think it's all gloom and doom. That, you know, we really have great groundwater here, and that's why we need to protect it. And that's why we have great surface water too, because groundwater and surface water in our in Wisconsin, in this humid part of the United States, are very well connected, and that has to do with our geology. But just keep in that mind, we have a wonderful, wonderful resource here that many other people in the world would love to have, and we have it. So we are lucky. But of course, there are concerns, and this conference is on water quality, so I'm going to talk about water quality. And these are kind of listed in what I think is a sort of a priority list. At least right now, the one we talk about the most is nitrate and agricultural contamination of groundwater. It's really the Wisconsin's probably most widespread contaminant in groundwater, and you can see the map on the right of it's shaded in. The darker the county is, the higher percentage of wells, and these are private wells in the county, are exceeding the nitrate standard of 10 milligrams per liter. And you can see that it's focused on the southern part of the state where we grow most of our crops. There's not much contamination in the northern part of the state, but there's not a lot of agriculture up there. So nitrate's a big deal. And it's very hard to deal with, of course, because it's important for our economy, for our ag economy. So it's a necessary evil, but it's a problem. And then related to that, of course, are pesticides, things like atrazine that's used on many crops, but many other pesticides. Neonicotinoids is a recent one that's been used. These are a problem in lower concentrations. Next on the list are PFAS, which you've all heard about, man-made chemicals that are used for firefighting and waterproofing and many non-slip frying pans and many things, but they are getting into groundwater. And I know they're in some of the Madison wells here. They're in other wells around the state. And there's right now there are not well accepted standards for their health effects. There's a lot of controversy even at the legislative level about how to deal with them, but that's a statewide problem. Below that, I've got pathogens, bacteria, viruses, protozoa, things that biological things that can make you sick. These are often related to livestock, human waste, and so forth. And we see these often in private wells and in some deep wells. So that's something that we're dealing with. And then we get into some natural occurring things that like arsenic, radionuclides. There are other natural contaminants that are present in not all across the state, but in some places, and we deal with those. And we have other emerging things, what are called emerging contaminants, pharmaceuticals, PCPs, or personal care products that have to do with the lives we lead and the products we use here. And the next slide is just the webpage from the report to the legislature, because I think for your group tonight, this is a great resource, and you can see the web address at the bottom there. The report to the legislature is an annual report that's produced by the Groundwater Coordinating Council, which I sit on. It's a council that has membership from all the state agencies and from the university, and there's a public member as well. And they put together quite a nice report every year about all aspects of groundwater in Wisconsin, with priority recommendations and summaries about various topics. And that's a great place to educate yourself about groundwater issues around the state. And so I will stop there and stop sharing my screen and move on to the next person, Susan.
Okay. Well, first of all, I think we need to check and see if there are any comments and questions from other panelists about what Ken has shared with us.
I'd just like to echo Ken's comments about the fact that we do have abundant and in general good water quality when it comes to our groundwater and for the most part our surface waters. So I thought that was a good comment that Ken made, that we have a lot more to be thankful for than we do worry about, but let's also focus on protecting what we have. But I thought that was a good comment, Ken.
Okay, I do see one question, Susan, about a filter on our water faucet tap. Does it help? Is it worth it? And by that I assume you mean one of these commercial filters that you can put on. Those usually do work for some things. It's important if you're looking at a home water treatment device of any kind that you understand what it does, because filters filter out particulate things like perhaps bacteria, but they're not going to filter out nitrate, because nitrate is a dissolved substance. And so any water treatment device, being a filter or some other device, you need to read the fine print carefully and understand what it actually is supposed to do. But many of those things actually do work, of course.
So what issues then do we see here in Rock County with groundwater, drinking water, and other surface waters?
Well, Susan, I would say that it's pretty much it's pretty much like what I just showed for the whole state. Nitrate is a big deal in Rock County because there are, particularly along the Rock River, there's some very permeable materials, a lot of sand and gravel there. And there's a lot of agriculture and both the livestock and corn and crops in Rock County. So nitrate is a big problem. But there's also particularly near the cities like near Beloit, Rockford, or not Rockford, but near Beloit. A lot of, there's been a lot of waste disposal sites, a lot of spills. So there are a lot of man-made contaminants at various sites down there. And then some of these other things I mentioned, I don't know specifically about PFAS, but I'm sure there are some PFAS occurrences, and Rick could probably expand on that. Let me talk a little bit about water quantity. I'm not aware that water quantity is a big problem in Rock County, although maybe someone would disagree, but that's not something that we hear about a lot here at the survey. Water quality is what the problems that people mainly complain about.
Okay.
Tim, do you have any feedback on reverse osmosis systems? Some people down here are putting them in their attempt to lessen the load of nitrates in the water.
Well, for reverse osmosis is an accepted method. Those systems are not cheap. Are you talking about for municipal wells or for individual
Actually, individual homeowners?
Well, certainly that's an option, but again, those are not cheap systems. And of course, the drawback with any system like that that's somewhat complex, and reverse osmosis is complex, requires power and so forth, is that like any mechanical in your home, it requires maintenance and care to make sure it's working. And so it's always a worry if you're depending on that to protect your water quality. That means you have a responsibility and a need to maintain it. And and what happens when the power goes out, or you're away from home or whatever, all these things. It's better in my opinion, if the water can be cleaned from the source rather than having to clean it up on the way. And that's been our philosophy in Wisconsin for many, many, many years, as to let's keep the source clean, and then we don't have to worry about disinfecting or denitrifying or whatever at the tap. That unfortunately is getting hard to do in some places.
I'm sure our viewers would like a simplified explanation of what reverse osmosis is. I've never heard of it before. I have no idea what you're talking about. So if you could please, someone on our panel, please explain it in a more simple way for us. Well,
any water chemists out there? In a nutshell, Susan, it's just you might almost think of it as a chemical filter. You're allowing some molecules through and others not, but I can't really explain it easily in a thing like this, and I'm not a water treatment chemist. Someone else here may be able to do that, but it's a chemical, electrochemical filter, put it that way. So, but it's not a simple device. It's a rather complicated thing.
Okay.
As I understand it, it's only good between 10 and 25 parts per million.
Well, that would depend. I think that would depend on what model you purchase. That sounds reasonable, but you could probably spend more money and get something better. But again, in my impression is these are not something generally that is used in homeowner at the homeowner level, because they tend to be expensive.
Yeah. I know I paid $800 for mine years ago, and I was going after another contaminant, which was copper, and I was concerned about lead and other things. But when my blonde daughter's hair turned green, and she doesn't swim, I was a little worried. And so I went after it that way, and I don't know if I solved it, but it's a little better.
Okay.
Addie, you mentioned something about invasive species. Could you talk more about that with our Rock River?
Sure. So I guess a lot of the work that I do is kind of focused on preventing invasive species, specifically aquatic invasive species, from getting here. A lot of the aquatic invasive species that we have, when they get into a lake or a river, it's pretty hard to get them out. And some of them do have impacts on water quality too. If you've got like a big clump of invasive plants in your lake, like curly leaf pondweed or Eurasian water milfoil are two really common ones. And sometimes they can cause issues like they prevent the flow of water. So it can cause water to get hotter than it would if those plants weren't there. When they die off, just because of, seasonal variation, that's a lot of organic matter that's decaying in the water, can release a lot of nutrients. So yeah, definitely kind of ties into the surface water quality side of things.
Okay. Christina, could you comment also?
On invasive species? Sure.
On anything about,
Oh, yeah.
about Rock County water.
Sure. I did see a question in the chat that I may be able to respond to about large scale dairy farms. That's typically kind of an issue that people get worried about as farms grow. That does have an impact on our resources. And anytime you have a lot of animals in one area, you're going to obviously draw a lot more on the resource and have more of that manure, for instance, is going to be in one space. I think there's one of my favorite things I've ever heard from a county to say is that it's the farmer, not always the farm. The way that somebody manages their farm can be completely different from farm to farm. One of the good things about the large farms is that they are permitted. So there is a regulatory process, which so a lot of little farms do not have the same sort of regulatory oversight. So I think there are more process. If you find that you're having issues, there's other channels to go through. It's a little bit more difficult sometimes in the smaller farms that have issues, but there's also always really good resources at the county, I think, to help when you see issues, to communicate with your neighbors, their county, and there are a lot of programs out there to help provide those farmers support on ensuring that they're meeting their standards. So we have good state standards. We just have to make sure everyone is following them.
Okay. Well, since we were talking about farms, etc., to what extent in our county, Rock County, to what extent can we point to a single cause of any contaminants in our Rock County water? Someone who has not spoken before, Sarah?
Sure. Well, so, and I think people have touched on this. We talk about nitrate contamination or atrazine or, things that are running off from farm fields. We run into the issue of non-point source pollution, right? So it's a bit more tricky to point to a single source, right? If it's coming kind of diffusely across the landscape from multiple different farms. And as Christina was talking about, farmers by regulation are required to put together what's called a nutrient management plan. We're talking about nitrates or phosphorus that come off of their farm fields. Unfortunately, in the state, we know that about 37 to 38% are actually doing that. And often the science, needs to be updated and really, fine-tuned for particular areas in order to make sure that we're looking at the geology and the risks of how much nutrients would actually run off of those farm fields. So maybe someone else can weigh in that is a little bit more drilled down to Rock County, since I kind of look at a statewide perspective. But when we're talking about nutrients in particular, it can be pretty tricky because they are sort of seen as this non-point source. So
Okay.
maybe Bill wants to weigh in.
I think I would agree with Sarah that it's very difficult to point to a single source. From the urban perspective, we're also a non-point source discharger to the waterways through our storm sewer systems. We have suspended solids and nutrients that are making it to the waterways as well. The biggest source of urban sediment is construction sites. And so ensuring there's proper erosion control and sediment control devices on construction is a big help. One of the biggest sources of urban phosphorus actually is street trees. in the spring when they're budding, the buds fall in the street, get washed into the storm sewer straight out to the water bodies. And in the fall, when the leaves are falling off the trees, landing in the street, we get a lot of rain in the fall. So you'll get the leaves blocking gutters and storm sewer inlets. And it just creates a phosphorus stew as it's going down the storm sewer. So, you know, it's coming from a little bit of everywhere. So we're all in it together, and we all need to be part of the solutions.
Yeah,
I think that's an excellent point. Could we defer to Rick Peterson on
Sure.
the group that's working in Rock County? It's a cooperative effort between urban members of the group and farmers.
Yeah, thanks, Wes. Yeah, we do have a Rock County Nitrate Work Group, which, as Wes said, is comprised of not only county departments, but Rock County farmers and the ag industry, looking at the nitrate issue. And you know, one of the largest contributors, I don't think it's debatable, is agricultural inputs when it comes to nitrates in our groundwater. But they're not the only contributing source. Septic systems are also a contributing source to nitrates in our groundwater, and in some high density areas of septic systems, that can be a significant contributing source, as well as fertilizers from lawn fertilizers and manure and other things. So it is a variety of sources, and it is hard to pinpoint it. The Nitrate Work Group is working mainly with the agricultural community at different ways to improve and reduce nitrates in groundwater. We've got the study going on the county farm, looking at nitrates contributions to the groundwater going across the county farm based on different farming practices. Our land conservation department has some watershed projects going on that is focused on nitrates in groundwater, which is some of the kind of unique for watershed projects in Wisconsin and across the nation, really. So a lot of work going on there. And I'm not sure if Willie Hughes was able to join us or not, but there's also a Rock County producer-led group working on the nitrate issue. And that is a group of farmers that were able to get a so going on across the county, participating.
Anyone else want to jump in at this point?
This is Bill. I'll jump back in here for a second. Jumping back to some of the earlier conversation that Ken was having. For Beloit in particular, we do have a lot of availability to water, groundwater. We have both shallow aquifers and deep aquifers. Our wells are kind of spread out between the two of them. And the groundwater contamination that we do see, one is nitrates. One of our wells about 15 years ago was becoming elevated with nitrates. And so we did a mitigation project. It was a shallow well. They're the ones that tend to be contaminated with nitrates. And because we have such good availability, we were able to drill a deep well next to it. And then we blend the two to dilute the concentrations of nitrates before it makes it out to the drinking water system. The other contaminant that we see in some of our wells is radium. A couple years ago, we had elevated radium in well number 9, and we did some mitigation with rehabilitating the well, and we're back within safe drinking water standards. But so those are the two contaminants that we've had some experience with, and we have done some PFAS testing in Beloit. We did it last year. We were well within all of the proposed standards. We are in line to do another round of testing here within the next couple months. And then we're expecting in 23 and 24 there to be some required testing with the uncontaminated monitoring rule number 5.
What is that?
I think it's every third or fourth year, the United States EPA issues additional testing for drinking water utilities. They call it the unregulated contaminant monitoring rule. So they're picking different chemicals or whatnot that aren't normally tested for in municipal drinking water supplies. They're saying, this go around, we want you to check for these things, and they just kind of keep going through different components or compounds for us to test. And then the next round is going to have a lot of PFAS compounds in it.
Could you briefly explain dilution is the solution and how mixing occurs in Beloit? I know it does in Janesville, but I was just curious about Beloit.
Yeah, so for that one with the nitrates, that was in our well number 11. It used to pump directly into the distribution system. Now that well pumps into a 2.5 million gallon reservoir, along with our well number 14. And well 11 is a shallow well 14 is deep and has no nitrate contamination at all. So the two of them pump into a 2.5 million gallon reservoir, get mixed, and then we do all of our testing as it comes out of that reservoir into the system, where normally you're just testing straight out of the well as it goes in.
Thank you.
I
Where
just
did the-
wanted to throw in a little interesting geologic tidbit. Rock County, the sand and gravel along the Rock River is very thick and very permeable. So as I said before, the groundwater resources and the aquifers there are really great aquifers. And so you have a lot of thickness of sand and gravel, and it's very permeable. So water gets into the wells really quickly. The downside of that is it's also contaminants can move quickly as well. But as far as quantity, it's really one of the most prolific aquifers in the state. Really, it is. So that's a positive thing. But on the downside, it means that contaminants can move rapidly as well.
And we're seeing that there are multiple sources typically for contaminants, and it's difficult to isolate any one thing. And so therefore we truly are all in this together. That was a great comment to make. Just curious though, Bill, where did the radium come from?
The radium is a naturally occurring thing that happens in the deep sandstone, limestone aquifers.
Oh, okay. Oh, I didn't know that. All right. Okay, so in terms of these contaminants, how do they affect our environmental health and our public health? And when would we have reason for alarm, Rick?
Yeah, well, we've talked a lot about nitrates, and it's pose a health risk. Most commonly, you'll hear referred to something called blue baby syndrome, where elevated nitrates can be converted to nitrites and cause a oxygen in infants or a fetus, which is not good. And it can be combined with other sources of nitrates or nitrites in the diet of the infant. And so the health advisory level for nitrates is 10 milligrams per liter. Anything below that is deemed to be acceptable to drink. Anything above that is going to be looked at as a health concern. We have nitrates in Rock County. About 25% of wells that we test in Rock County exceed that 10 milligrams per liter nitrates. So we have one of the highest percentages in the state with nitrates. There are other potential health concerns with nitrates. Some of those are a little less proven, I would say, but but there certainly are other concerns to the general population also, but the health standard is primarily based on the blue baby syndrome. As far as some of the other contaminants, PFAS, I believe the main concern there is potential cancer causing. But I'm not totally up to speed on the PFAS health effects. Thankfully, we haven't had any significant concerns there in Rock County. One contaminant that we haven't talked about, or a couple of them, one is arsenic. We do have arsenic that show up in private wells in Rock County. Arsenic is found naturally in our geology, and we do have some arsenic that have shown up in private wells. Not a lot of wells, but that can also be a significant health concern if it's at high enough levels. And the other one that we really haven't talked about, which doesn't have to do with our groundwater or our geology, but it does have to do with our drinking water, and that's lead. Lead is definitely a concern. The source of the lead is usually either municipal water lines that are old and were maybe based from lead components, or service lines going to the home that could have lead components, or the plumbing in a household. Everything from the piping in a house to the faucets. So there's a huge emphasis on removing that infrastructure that can contain lead. I'm sure Bill could talk a lot more about that, but I know Beloit, Janesville, Edgerton, many of the communities are going through a lot of replacement of lead service lines and water mains.
Yes, they are. What communities do you see that still have a long way to go with the lead replacement?
I can comment for Beloit. We do still have a long ways to go. We know currently there's about 3,000 service laterals on the utility side that are still lead, and we're still trying to determine the customer side of the lateral how many, but it's probably somewhere in that same range. Most of the customer side ones are galvanized iron, not actually made of lead, but a galvanized service lateral could absorb lead from places upstream and then re-leach it out into the future. So a galvanized service that's downstream or has previously been downstream of lead is also considered to be lead. One thing we do have with our water here in Beloit and Rock County is it is very hard. It has a lot of dissolved solids in it from the limestone. And that does put a coating inside of the pipes that helps protect us to an extent from the lead leaching out. Many communities that have softer water have to add in chemicals that prevent the lead from leaching, but we don't have to do that because of our naturally occurring hard water.
Do you anticipate any infrastructure monies coming to the cities and perhaps the county to deal with this?
Yeah, there's been a lot of funding allocated for lead service replacement through ARPA funds and the bill, bipartisan infrastructure bill. My understanding at this point is most of that funding is going to come out through the state, through the Safe Drinking Water Loan Program. And I haven't heard many details yet on if it's going to just be loans or if it's going to have principal forgiveness associated with it. I know for the last couple of years, there has been some funding already available for the customer side lead service replacement. This year, Beloit received $600,000 from the state, which will replace approximately 100 private services.
So just to add to that, I know that Milwaukee has the lion's share of lead laterals that need replacement. And so I believe that, Wes, to answer your question, I think a big percentage of the bipartisan infrastructure law money coming into Wisconsin will go to Milwaukee. There's some really big equity issues there as well. Primarily people of color that have been drinking water that is heavily loaded with lead, exposing children to it. So I do believe a big chunk of that is going to go to Milwaukee.
Yeah, and when we talk about lead services, or lead in our drinking water, the thing that always comes up is Flint, Michigan. And one of the things that really caused their problem was they switched where they were getting their drinking water from one source to another. The second source was just a little bit more of a corrosive water. And so it was starting to leach the water, or leach the lead out of those lines, where communities who don't currently have an issue with the levels in their drinking water, even if they do have some lead in their systems, if there's not high concentrations now, if we don't change something with our water, it should still remain at least status quo. Not that all of a sudden everybody's getting lead poisoning like in Flint, Michigan.
This next question is meant for everyone, so I do hope you'll all jump in and give your answer. To what extent is or will our water in Rock County be affected by climate change? Is it being affected by climate change yet? And if not, what do you anticipate how it will be affected by climate change?
I'll jump in real quick, not on a groundwater standpoint, but our waterways. One thing we've been seeing a lot with climate change is we're getting more frequent and intense storms. And so that's leading to additional erosion that puts more sediment into our waterways, and then just more flooding in general.
From the groundwater standpoint, we aren't always sure, but we are seeing more higher groundwater levels in some years, and so this is what we call groundwater flooding, where there are areas that are flooded, but it's not because a stream overflowed, it's because the water table actually rose higher than the land surface. And so sometimes you'll see farm fields, for example, that used to be dry and now they are basically have turned into a pond or something. And that's not because water ran into them. It's again more that the water table rose and it's now they're being inundated. And so that's one thing that we really are seeing, that I'm at the survey. I not so much this year because we had a pretty dry winter, but last year we were getting a lot of calls about that.
When you have successive periods of flooding and then drying, does that concentrate nitrates in the groundwater?
I don't know. I'm not sure that it does, Wes, but I can't really answer that question. We do know that these more intense rainfalls and so forth they change the recharge regime, and as Bill said, it causes more erosion, more soil loss, but it can also drive things into the groundwater faster too. So and so then you get into lots of things like what's the timing of fertilizing or manure disposal or something related to when a big storm comes, and all those things are interacting. So it's often hard to predict exactly what an outcome is going to be, but we know things are changing.
Yeah, just a follow up on that. As we have changes in climate and in weather, one of the big things is that the crops may not grow the way the farmers want them to grow, whether it's too much rain or too little. And a lot of the fertilizer that's put on is not efficiently used by the crops if the crops aren't able to grow to their potentials. So changes in climate certainly can affect the crops, and when the crops don't utilize the nutrients, that's going to impact the groundwater. Another thing that we haven't talked about is blue-green algae. And that's something that we do see show up in our surface waters in Rock County. Lake Koshkonong is famous for having or algal blooms every year. Clear Lake, we certainly see it, and other water bodies. And one of the factors with the algal growth is water temperature, along with nutrients and sunlight. But certainly with climate change, that is an increased potential for more blue-green algae blooms.
I'll just jump in really quick to say there's a new really great report out of the big collaboration, academia and different folks from the agencies that Wisconsin's just recently, the Initiative of Climate Change Impacts. And there is great maps in there too that kind of help showcase what the weather changes might look like and what some of the impacts that we're feeling and maybe some adaptation strategies to kind of combat that. So it's a pretty great interactive website that they've just launched just about a month ago, maybe. So I recommend looking at that and seeing wherever you are in the state and in Brock County for sure, and what you can do maybe to learn a little bit more about what's coming down the road. And I'll just echo that we're seeing these erratic storms across the state, and a lot of counties are starting to think about how can we better plan for that. And we know that the rains are going to make it hard to farm and hard to keep soil there. And all of our issues that we have are the good news is most of our solutions for adaptation kind of have the same ecosystem benefits that we're looking for drinking water. So if we can kind of continue to march down that conservation implementation road, maybe at an accelerated pace, hopefully we'll see those benefits in water quality too.
Thank you, Christina. Would you please put that website into the chat for everyone for us?
Yep, I just did. So hopefully everyone has it.
Okay, awesome. I didn't see it yet, but
I also threw in while Rick was talking, the DHS's publication on nitrate contamination that Rick and our little conservation and health group helped respond to a little bit. It's just a nice kind of handout. So I put that in the chat earlier too about health and nitrate contamination.
awesome. Thank you. Anyone else want to jump in about climate change and what we might be seeing as effects in our water?
I think folks have hit it right on with, we're going to be getting warmer and wetter and having those more frequent intense storms. I think the only thing that I would add too is that, as our water is warm, I swear I do things other than invasive species, but we could be seeing more, invasive species that are, perhaps further south coming into the state where maybe they wouldn't have been able to survive the winters before, which could, always have impacts on water quality that can be kind of hard to foresee. So.
Absolutely. And have would you anticipate then the invasive species affecting our fish, the types of fish we still can maintain, and the health of these fish?
It's possible, yeah. There's some, that would perhaps compete with our native fish or compete with their food sources. It's always a little bit hard, I think, to tease out the exact, impacts of specific species, especially before they get here. But yeah, I think it's definitely possible. I don't know if anyone else has anything to add on that front.
I'm worried about snakeheads eating all the carp.
Several of you discussed agriculture, and I think we do need to focus a little bit on that before we start with the public Q&A. And I do understand that many farmers are following the guidelines and whatnot, but is there a way that agriculture in Wisconsin could change so that we could conserve our water and protect our water better? Just open that up.
Well, let me, the tricky thing here, Susan, is that a number of us who have looked at this problem have concluded that there are many places where we simply cannot grow corn at the yield that we are doing now and have groundwater that without nitrate. It just can't be done. And I mean, not everywhere, but there are places like that. And best management practices are not going to solve the problem. And so there you're looking at other options, which is probably going to be either how do you have farming where if people aren't going to make money, they can't make money if their yield isn't up. So you either have to subsidize that somehow or grow a different crop. And so it may be that we need to grow a different crop. And the farmers that I've talked to are, many of them may be willing to grow a different crop if they can sell it. So they have to have a way to have a business.
Yes.
So then that it's complicated because it's tied into our national food supply and transportation routes and merchandising and all that. But just so people are clear, I don't think that we can best management our way out of the nitrate problem alone. That just my experience is it's just not going to work in many places.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Thanks for that, Ken. I think that is the number one issue that we see is that it's a very complicated supply chain with a lot of drivers, and consumers are one of those drivers. And in some cases, I think we in Wisconsin, and I work with a lot of other states, we have a network of conservationists across the country. And Wisconsin has a really great soil health movement right now. And that is one thing that's kind of shifting a lot of mindset. And this isn't going to work for every farm for sure. Like it's a complicated system, but I think that we are seeing some really great shifts in mindset, and adapting to climate is a really important thing that comes with retaining soil. We've installed more cover crops in the state than we've seen in a long time. It's not going to get us to the place we need to be fast enough, probably, and we're going to need to have some big conversations as a state and as consumers. But yeah, I think that we are seeing good. There are a lot of examples across the state of these producer-led groups working with watershed-led groups that are starting to learn a little bit more about each other. And that's been helpful. A lot of peer-to-peer learning across the state. And as more farmers are starting to understand the benefits of some of these practices in places they can, then I think we're seeing incremental change. Again, we need to accelerate that much faster. I work a lot in the western part of the state with farmers who have been hit by a lot of flooding and storms, and they are really ready to change fast. Unfortunately, it's because of devastation, and we'd like to do some stuff before that. But I think as we continue to learn with each other and do a lot of sampling. I know Rock County, like I think Rick mentioned earlier, on their county farm, they're doing a lot of demonstrations, trying to figure out different cropping systems, figure out ways that they can show that we can have financially secure farms, viable farms, feeding the folks in the community with certain practice changes. And I think as we continue to show that that can work for people and shift some of these systems, I think that's going to help a lot. But Ken does have a very good point on some of the major fields, but also consumers are a big driver in that system. I think there's really good products out there that you could support. Like grass-based systems are an excellent system. And as more people use those and pay that little premium on grass milk or grass-fed beef, it sends signals. So I'd say that would be one small way is meeting up with farmers and getting to know each other and learning about each other's issues and doing your thing to support the food that you believe in.
Mm-hmm. Good point. Anyone else want to jump in on this topic?
I was wondering if Ken could explain how the complicated glacial geology of Wisconsin makes this job of change very difficult.
Well, it's, I'm not, how do you mean why do you mean it's more difficult?
Well, in some areas, we have perched water tables. We look at the maps of subsoil geology, and there's a lot of complicated issues here in terms of where we find water that's contaminated with nitrates, perhaps even lead, or maybe arsenic or mercury in different parts of the state. And the whole state is rather complicated because of the geologic background.
Oh, yes. Yeah. So, well, you're right. I mean, it's not just the glacial geology. It's we have a very interesting layered bedrock system too. We have some of the oldest rocks in the world here, and some of the youngest glacial materials. So we have quite an interesting spectrum of geologic materials here. But of course, you mentioned glacial geology, and we have in Rock County is actually probably simpler than other places in some ways, because you have this big bedrock valley full of sand and gravel that is largely glacially derived. But then we have outside of the valley, of course, we have glacial sediments, sand, silt, and clay in different layers. We had a number of different glacial advances in these have left landforms. So you're right, it is a complicated system, and that means groundwater is not occurring just in one material. It's occurring in bedrock, it's occurring in sand and gravel, it's occurring in clay, it's occurring in fractured rock and in porous rocks. As a hydrogeologist, it's a fascinating place to work, but it does mean that the geologic and water quality problems can be quite daunting. But I should also say that that's the case almost anywhere you go. Wisconsin's not special in that way. I can go anywhere in the United States and we can find complexity. So because groundwater systems can be quite complex.
Mm-hmm. And Christina started a conversation that I think we should follow up on. And she was talking about these issues they're very complicated, and they do deal with the general public as it is. So what role can the general public play in conserving our water and protecting it for future generations? Anyone can jump in.
I don't want to steal Addie's thunder, but I think that the Rock River Coalition is a very good place to start in my experience with them. Getting involved in understanding some of the work they're doing locally. I'll let Addie give all the examples, but I think that they're a great place to start your community education.
Thanks, Christina. Yeah, I guess I'll say that I think if you're interested in kind of learning more and getting involved in community science can be a really good way to do that. It can, give you a feel for, what the water quality is like on, like say a specific local stream near you, and start to learn about how to test that. I think I'll also say that, getting involved in those efforts is a really great way to contribute long-term data sets, which are super important for tracking trends in our water quality over time, especially as we start dealing with climate change and all that. Folks at the DNR kind of do their best to test water quality, but they can't be everywhere all the time. So having volunteers that are able to, supplement those water quality testing efforts is huge. And it's kind of just a great way to, get more connected and learn more about the waters near you.
Sure. And if someone wanted to do that, Addie, who is watching, what would they want to do?
How would you get involved? I would recommend sending me an email. There's trainings for how to get involved with water quality that are actually coming up very soon. And folks can, will come, you'll learn everything, you get all the equipment you need, all that good stuff. And I can send my contact information in the chat.
Yes, please do. Yes, please do. Anyway, right now. That'd be great.
And another group that people could reach out to as a resource is the Rock River Stormwater Group. It's a consortium of almost all of the municipalities in Rock County who have stormwater discharge permits. We work together with a campaign called Protect Wisconsin Waterways, working with the student marketing group at UW-Whitewater for stormwater education and public participation programs. So that's a great resource, but things people can just do kind of locally is minimize the use of fertilizers, get soil tests before you apply them, because most people don't actually need them. In the urban environment, keeping grass clippings and leaves out of the street, big source of nutrients, using phosphate-free cleaners. A lot of little things add up. Picking up after your pets, clean up the pet waste, washing vehicles at a car wash or in your grass rather than on paved surfaces where it's going to be directly connected to water bodies, and using native plantings where possible. It's not always possible in an urban environment with standards on how long your grass can be and such, but the native plantings, even in small areas, if you have a rain garden, can really help promote infiltration and soil stability.
Could you tell everyone what a rain garden is?
Yep, so a rain garden is kind of a small depressed area where you'd put native plantings, and you could direct downspouts to it or just surface drainage from a small area just to get that water to infiltrate into the ground and get cleaned by the native vegetation.
Thank you. And Bill, would you mind putting in your email address into the chat and also that stormwater group that you're talking about?
Yep, I can get a link to the Rock River Stormwater Group's website, which I believe is protectwisconsinwaterways.org. But I will verify the website and get it in the chat along with my email address.
Thank you very much, Bill. That was very helpful. Anyone else have anything to add about that?
Susan, I just wanted to say that, and that maybe this goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyways. Groundwater is a local resource.
Yes.
It's sourced locally. It doesn't come from Canada. We often hear this myth that, oh, the water came from Canada or somewhere or Lake Superior. No, it's not. It's coming from probably within a mile or so of wherever you are. That's where your groundwater is coming from. And that is a powerful message. It means you can control the land use. You don't have to worry about what they're doing in Milwaukee or Wausau or Green Bay or even Madison. You have to worry about what's going on in Rock County. That's what's controlling your water quality. And I think that's not true everywhere. I mean, there are other parts of the nation where we have more regional aquifers, but not here. These are locally sourced, particularly for the shallower wells that we're really mostly using.
To follow up on what Ken just mentioned, I think one thing that people can do, especially if they're on their own water supply, their own private well, is test their well. We're finding that only about 5% of the people are testing their wells on an annual basis, and people really should be testing their well every year for nitrates and bacteria at a minimum. And by testing, they'll with their health risk. Most people are going to find out their water is really, really good from a water quality perspective, but those that aren't, they need to know.
I was going to chime in and say the same thing as Rick. I know that there's some research out there that shows that there's a really strong kind of peer-to-peer pressure, I don't know what you want to call it. When you see your neighbor testing, you're more likely to do it yourself. And so, where that education lies and being able to network and and amongst, people you live nearby, I think is really important. So I know in the age of COVID, we're all kind of holed up, but where can you connect with those around you? And I am going to have to drop off the line in a few minutes. I really thank you for this opportunity. Such an esteemed panel here. I have to put a baby to bed, so I'll hang on for a few more minutes and I'll drop my email in the chat if anyone wants to connect.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sarah, for participating. Okay. I think at this point we can take a look at some PowerPoint slides regarding some more things that public can do. In terms of our water policy in Wisconsin, where it stands right now. Okay, legislative updates. So where are we in terms of setting standards on various contaminants that we've been talking about, like PFAS or nitrates, etc. So in terms of PFAS, the Department of Natural Resources did outline a three-pronged approach with just as we've been talking about, groundwater, drinking water, and other surface waters. The Natural Resources Board did approve a drinking water standard that was less strict than what our Wisconsin Department of Health would have wanted us to pass. They approved a 70 parts per trillion versus 20 parts per trillion, according to what the Wisconsin Department of Health wanted. So the Natural Resources Board was less strict. The board also passed limits for surface waters that were based on types of contaminants. So there was no standardization. It was more for specific types of chemicals that are listed right there for you. The Natural Resources Board also rejected proposed limits of PFAS in groundwater at 20 parts per trillion, citing compliance costs, etc. But at this point, then what has happened is that there are hundreds of thousands of wells throughout the state of Wisconsin that actually have no limits on PFAS at the current time. These weekend rules were blocked by a judge. It is in the courts now, but until the appeal is made, the PFAS standards are on hold. So we do not have any PFAS standards currently in the state of Wisconsin. Next slide, please. There was a bill that did come up that was written, the Assembly Bill 419, which is called the Clear Act. It would include funding for a municipal grant program for water testing and so forth, and a county well testing grant as well, and also a longitudinal study on the possible health effects of PFAS. That bill did not get a hearing when the legislative session ended for the year, but stay tuned because most likely there will be a hearing early in the session next year, and we'll want to be aware of it so that in case you want to attend the public hearing on it, we can do so. The Wisconsin DNR proposed an update to its contamination and groundwater administrative rules and NR 151, but that was blocked by the state legislature. The DNR is directed under state statutes to pass the rules to meet water quality standards and address specific water quality issues. The DNR began working on this rule in 2019, but did abandon plans to craft nitrate standards in areas vulnerable to groundwater contamination in November of 21. So we do not have nitrate standards either as yet. Next slide, please. Assembly Bill 1110 would restore local control over shoreline zoning laws. Shoreline zoning laws are very important to protect lakes and rivers from contaminants that happen with runoff from development that happens too close to the shoreline. In 2015, the state legislature took control away from the counties, and the state actually passed less restrictive standards to protect the shoreline. So in other words, development could happen closer to the shoreline than what many counties would have done. For example, counties might want 75 to limit development 75 feet away from the shoreline, but now that's a much less restrictive standard. This bill did not receive a public hearing before the end of the legislative session, but again, stay tuned because we do believe that that will be coming up again. And, you know, before 2015, the counties did have control over the shoreline zoning laws, and now they do not. So anyway, let's go back to our chat. There were a few questions. There weren't that many questions in the chat, but we do want to cover some that were there. One person would like to know if we do things like change the way we drive, what we drive, would that help our water situation? Anyone can answer that question.
I'm wondering if they're meaning like because of climate change mitigation. We all are contributing some way, and I think every little bit helps. I would say for sure. The other place that comes to mind is maybe in the road salt situations. I guess that would be a place where there may be. There's a great stormwater engineer out of DNR for years that was also a water action volunteer monitoring person who always said that it's our expectation on when we drive. We expect to drive really fast, and so we put more salt on to avoid those collisions. So I suppose in that regard, if we just were a little more careful, or if there was any way that we could limit the amount of road salt we had, I guess that would be one way that could be more direct line to driving. I don't know. Anybody else has anything else?
Getting that runoff. And then what about oil? Does the oil ever get into the system from runoff, or possibly from air pollution? Would that get into the water supply at all?
Yes, I think there's a few things there. Our vehicles all have various fluids in them if we're not maintaining vehicles appropriately. Gasoline, oil, transmission fluid, any of those types of things are dripping in the roadways and washing off into our water bodies. Another thing is most of our vehicles are producing greenhouse gases that are having an effect on the climate, and that is causing with climate change, the more intense rainfalls that are having an effect also.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Another thing related to that is we are using a fuel. A lot of that fuel has ethanol in it. Ethanol comes from corn. And frankly, most of the corn that's grown here is not being used to feed people. It's being used to make ethanol. And that was touted as an environmental, it's good for the environment. But if you really look at the whole chain of making ethanol, it's really not much of an improvement at all. And it's probably worse for the environment overall as far as the nitrate cycle. So driving a gasoline powered car less, you can take that back to you maybe fixing the nitrate problem in some point.
That is a great point, Ken. The ethanol piece is a tough one for Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Good connection back.
Mhm, mhm. And we had another question about going back to agriculture, and this one dealt with the large factory farms or the CAFOs. To what extent are CAFOs a real problem with our water in Rock County? And if so, what can the public do about it?
Well, I know there are some large CAFOs in Rock County. I can't comment on specific ones. Certainly in general, CAFOs are a tough issue because they're concentrating manure and cattle in one place, and in some ways that could be a real positive because you're doing a large scale, more professional management of these things, and yet you are producing an awful lot of manure that has to get disposed of on the landscape. And there's frankly very little monitoring that's going into that. The DNR and DADCAP have kind of had their hands tied about what they can require, which is not very much. And so I think that those are a potential source of nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus. I'm not sure we really know all that's going on there. And I don't know, Christina, you probably have some comments on that in that front.
Well, I would say there's expanding folks at the DNR that are learning a lot more, and they're on their feet and on their toes trying to get as much as they can. And when we talk about standards and the issues that we have with the NR 151 not going forward, they did at least developed a lot of tools, and we do have a groundwater standard for nitrate. So I think the challenge that we have in some of these areas is just having the tools to better understand and monitor and agree on what, where, and how things should be monitored, so that we have a good idea of what is happening exactly. And I think we're moving in that direction. But yeah, they're regulated, so that should help. But like Ken said, having, just like your rural community has a so much draw on a resource, but there's not exactly that much regulation there. When you move to an urban community, you have a lot more people, but we can all feel pretty good that they're monitoring the water for us, but there's still an extent that we're drawing on that resource. So it's another one of these fun challenges that we don't have all the right answers, but folks around the state are working on it, I guess, as best as we can.
So we do have standards for nitrates.
We have a groundwater standard. Yep. And we have the same as the drinking water standard, 10 milligrams per liter. So we do have that standard. It doesn't always get perfectly enforced at the groundwater level as it does in a drinking water situation at a municipality, but that is a statewide standard that we do have. In some places that's really challenging to understand who is the one. How do you find the source that is actually contributing it and then slow that source down? So there's a lot of challenges in figuring out where that is always coming from, especially in heavy agriculture communities when everyone's probably given a little bit.
I have a question. You see all this road building going on, and they're reclaiming the concrete and the blacktop and whatever, but none of it is washed. So you still have all the embedded chemicals from runoff and the vehicles, the oil, the tire remnants in that material. So they grind it up they're doing it here in Janesville. They had a big article in the paper. They grind it up and they're using it as a base material. Now the base material, when it rains and it goes through the run through the soil and everything, that gravel underneath will suck in that water. Now, can there be contaminants coming from that materials that can get into the groundwater sources? That's my question.
I would say it's possible, yes. I would also say I'm not sure there's been a lot of research on that I have seen anyway. And that's about all I know about it. It's certainly possible, although I would say that I'm not sure in the bigger scheme of things if that's a big issue for us. I mean, I think some of these other things we've talked about are probably going to be the bigger issues. But that's just my quick opinion.
Yeah, I would agree with Ken. It may be possible, but it's going to not be all that likely to be a problem. It may be small amounts. And when it is being recycled as roadbed, new asphalt or concrete's going over the top of it that is impervious, that's going to stop the water from moving down into the roadbed. It's generally going to be pushing that water to storm sewer or to the roadside ditches. From a road design standard, keeping any water from infiltrating into the roadbed is the biggest thing in keeping the longevity of your roadway.
There were a couple of questions that Susan, I don't think got
Sure.
answered that had to do with water utilities.
Okay.
I don't know if Rick or Bill wants to answer these, but I'll just say that there was one about something. What are water utilities? How are they protecting our water? And just a couple of thoughts there. In my experience, most water utilities are pretty, have to be quite protective because that's their product is water, and they need to be selling clean water. So they develop, first of all, from the hydrogeology standpoint, what's called a source water protection or a wellhead protection area around the wells. And I say that because we at the survey did this for some of the Janesville wells and some of the other wells in Rock County. And that's just delineating the land surface area where water is recharged to particular wells. And then at least ideally you can pass some kind of zoning to keep contaminating things out of that area, or at least you understand where the water is coming from. So that's something that utilities do. And then, they do water purification to some extent, and at least chlorination, and most important, a lot of testing to be sure they're not putting out water that's got pathogens or high nitrate or PFAS or whatever, radium. So my experience with water utilities is they're taking a lot of care to produce a water. And again, they think of it as a product almost that's consumers want and that's safe. So just my 2 cents on water utilities. I think they're a good thing.
Yeah, and to second on that, the city of Beloit has a wellhead protection ordinance. It's a zoning ordinance. Prohibits the development of certain things like auto body or automotive repair, gas stations, and metal finishing, those types of things in our recharge areas for our wells. Our ordinance was passed somewhere around 8 to 10 years ago. It didn't remove any existing uses that were in it. They are all monitored, but it does prohibit future development of those types of things in the wellhead protection area. And we do a lot of testing. Some things are tested for daily, some are weekly, some things are every quarter, others are annually, every 2 years, every 3 years. There's schedules put out by the Department of Natural Resources that we must comply with. And if we fail to test for those things within the schedule, then public notices are required to say, hey, for whatever reason, we forgot to do this test. We got to depending on what it was, it has to be publicly noticed within 24 hours or 7 days, just depending on the contaminant or parameter we're testing for. And if we were to fail to do that, we could get very large citations from the Department of Natural Resources. So we take it all very seriously, making sure we're providing good quality drinking water for all of our customers.
Thank you very much. Is any other comments on that before we start wrapping up?
I see one other question, Susan, that kind of relates to that and that's the level at which nitrates, which a city would need to close a well. And that is the health standard of 10 parts per million. So in the case, like Bill said, with Beloit, and in the case with Janesville, they're able to blend to stay below that 10 part per million. But if it would, any well, municipal well or public well would go over 10, then they would be required to not be able to use that water.
Okay.
I just want to also just build off of that, of what Bill was saying and Rick was saying. There are a lot of these little municipal wells and private wells and well protection areas. And I would say Rock County is definitely a leader in our state, and with Rick, especially for a long time, working across these borders with municipalities. At the state level, we have an organization that Rock County is extremely active in, thinking about ways that we can take these wellhead, we can learn more about wellhead protection areas, and we can work with conservation, to work with those landowners, to think about that. Can also work with the county government, like now formally county board supervisor Wes Davis, but folks at the county level that can help put in those ordinances, and then work with the utilities as well. And in many other counties, working closely with utilities that are thinking about, they're maybe creeping up there in their wellhead. Their wells might be at 5 milligrams per liter, and they want to think about what can we be doing to reverse that trend. And so that work is happening across the state. That those kind of collaborations are important to kind of keep moving that. And just want to reassure everybody that we are thinking about that, and Rock County is definitely a leader in those conversations at the state level. So I thank them very much for their experience.
Wow, thank you. Well, I do want to be respectful of everyone's time, and it is 8:04 right now. So let's take a moment to thank you all so much for participating on this panel. You guys are just all rock stars. I'm just amazed at how much you know, how much you do. We are very grateful, and we are very fortunate. And it's not only for the water table, but we're very fortunate to have all of you working for us and taking care of our water. We really appreciate it very much. We thank everyone who viewed this program, and thank you for attending. We do hope to see you at UWW Rock County on April 28th, 2022 at 7 p.m. for the program called Solving the Climate Crisis with meteorologist Bob Lindmeyer. Rock County UW Rock is at 2909 Kellogg Avenue. So hope to see you all there. I will definitely be there. This recording will be available at the Janesville League of Women Voters website, and the link is right there, and also at the Beloit League of Women Voters website. So again, thank you all very much. We are indebted to you. So